The moment he sees her on the red carpet with 3 children who have his eyes, his world shatters as he realizes what he threw away. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Manhattan winter punished the city with a merciless blizzard as Tasha Williams sat in the waiting room of the Upper East Side prenatal clinic. She nervously squeezed Jaden's hand, her dark eyes scanning the pristine space with its minimalist decor and carefully arranged orchids. At 26, with her NYU computer science degree and brilliant mind, she still felt out of place among the wealthy women in designer maternity wear who seemed to belong here. "Williams Thompson?" the nurse called, her voice softening the hyphenated surname that still felt new on Tasha's tongue. Jaden squeezed her hand back, but Tasha noticed his smile didn't reach his eyes. 3 years ago, she couldn't have imagined being here, married to Jaden Thompson, Harvard MBA graduate, tech wunderkind, and heir to Boston old money. The memory of their first meeting flashed vividly in her mind. She had been hunched over her laptop at the university hackathon, her afro pulled back with a bandana, fingers flying across the keyboard as she refined her pattern recognition algorithm. He had approached her table, impressed by her solution that outperformed teams with twice the resources. "That's the most elegant code I've seen all day," he had said, his confidence both irritating and magnetic. "Harvard Business School," he'd added, extending his hand. "I need a technical co-founder with your kind of vision." Their romance had been improbable and intense. The daughter of a Bronx elementary school teacher and a bus driver, falling for Boston aristocracy. Even at their wedding, she'd overheard his mother's whispered comment to a cousin, "The girl from the Bronx cleans up nicely, I suppose." Now at 28, Jaden Thompson was CEO of Neurotech Solutions, a promising biomedical technology startup that had just secured its first venture capital round. Forbes had recently featured him in their 30 under 30 list, highlighting his exceptional pedigree and innovative vision. The ultrasound technician's cheerful voice pulled Tasha back to the present as cold gel was applied to her abdomen. "Let's see how this little one is doing, shall we?" Jaden's phone buzzed, again, the 5th time in 20 minutes. He glanced at it surreptitiously. The technician moved the wand over Tasha's belly, her brow furrowing slightly before a broad smile broke across her face. "Oh my!" "Well, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I see why you've been feeling so exhausted. Congratulations, you're expecting triplets." The silence that followed felt physical. Tasha's gaze darted between the monitor's grainy image and her husband's face, which had drained of all color. As she processed the news with a mixture of shock and growing joy, Jaden pulled his hand away from hers as if burned. "This will ruin everything," he muttered, standing abruptly. In the consultation room afterward, the doctor explained the implications of a multiple pregnancy, higher risks, specialized care requirements, necessary lifestyle changes. Jaden seemed distant, repeatedly checking his phone, nodding mechanically at the doctor's words without really listening. When they stepped into the hallway, he finally spoke, his voice as cold as the wind howling outside. "This wasn't the plan, Tasha. We're at the most crucial moment for the company. You know how much investment we just secured." "They're our children, Jaden," she replied, still stunned. "We'll figure it out. We always do." But he was already opening his briefcase, withdrawing an envelope that he thrust atop the ultrasound image she held against her chest. "Divorce papers. They've been ready for weeks. I was waiting for the right moment, but this," he pointed at the ultrasound, "this just confirms we have no future together." Tasha's world collapsed as she read the first lines of the document, unable to believe what was happening. Jaden's words continued, each one like a blade. "I won't waste my career on a girl from the Bronx and 3 bastards who'll drain my money. You'll never be anything but a burden, Tasha, a girl with ridiculous afro hair trying to enter a world that wasn't made for you." Tears streamed down her face as hurried passers-by moved around them, some averting their eyes from the uncomfortable scene on the icy sidewalk. "Our prenup is bulletproof. "You won't get anything from me," he continued, adjusting his Hermes tie. "Consider this a favor. You never fit into my world, and now you never will." And with those words, he turned his back and walked away, leaving Tasha holding the divorce papers in one hand and the first image of her children in the other as snowflakes began to cover her shoulders. The following weeks passed in a blur of humiliation and despair. Evicted from their Chelsea apartment, Tasha found herself sleeping on her cousin's tiny sofa in Harlem, counting coins for prenatal vitamins while battling debilitating morning sickness. The divorce proceeded with impressive speed, thanks to the elite lawyers Jaden had hired. The humiliation reached its peak when, 7 months pregnant, Tasha attempted to enter the launch party for Neurotech Solutions. Not to cause a scene, as tabloids would later speculate, but to beg Jaden for minimal financial support for the approaching delivery. Security guards barred her at the entrance, openly laughing at her protruding belly. "Mr. Thompson left specific instructions about you," one said, his voice heavy with contempt. That same night, back in the cramped apartment, Tasha watched the event coverage on television. Jaden smiled for the cameras, arm linked with a known model, as he announced an additional round of investments for his company. The contrast between the luxurious celebration and her own reality of counting pennies for dinner couldn't have been more cruel. Tasha stood at the window of her cousin's apartment, watching the glittering Manhattan skyline through a veil of tears. Her hands cradled her swollen belly, feeling the restless movements of the 3 lives within. The life she had imagined, the partnership, the shared success, the family, had disintegrated in an instant. Outside, the same merciless snow that had fallen the day of her abandonment continued to blanket the city. Tasha remembered Jaden's words, each one etched into her memory like acid. "You'll never be anything but a burden. A girl with ridiculous afro hair trying to enter a world that wasn't made for you." She felt a firm kick from one of the babies, then another, then a third, as if they were collectively protesting those cruel words. Tasha wiped her tears with the back of her hand and straightened her shoulders. "He's wrong about everything," she whispered to her unborn children, her voice growing stronger with each word. "About me, about you, about our future, and one day, I'll prove it." The next morning, Tasha Williams made 3 phone calls. To her former advanced algorithms professor at NYU, to a fellow programmer working at an AI lab, and to the editor of a small technology blog who had interviewed her years earlier. The abandonment had taken almost everything from her, but not her brilliant mind, nor her determination. "I have an idea," she said in each call, her voice steady despite her circumstances, "about emotional recognition in AI that's going to change everything." She sat at the tiny kitchen table afterward, a notebook open before her, sketching the first outline of what would become the empath algorithm. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, unaware that a revolution was being born in a cramped Harlem apartment by a pregnant woman who had been told she would never be anything. 15 years later, when Tasha Williams took the stage to announce the billion-dollar acquisition of Jaden's failing company, he would finally understand the magnitude of the mistake he made that snowy night. The 3 phone calls Tasha made that morning marked the beginning of her resistance. But the harsh reality of her situation remained inescapable. 2 days later, she stood trembling before the imposing glass doors of the family court building, clutching a folder of hastily gathered documents. Her attorney, a recent law school graduate who had taken her case pro bono, looked nearly as nervous as she felt. "Remember, Ms. Williams," the young lawyer whispered as they waited to be called, "the prenuptial agreement is extremely tight. We're mainly here to establish some minimum support for the children." The courtroom felt cavernous, its wooden panels and imposing bench designed to intimidate. When Jaden entered with his legal team, 3 polished attorneys in bespoke suits worth more than Tasha's entire wardrobe, the contrast couldn't have been more stark. Her simple maternity dress from a discount store stretched uncomfortably across her 7-month belly, while Jaden's Tom Ford suit looked freshly tailored. All rise for the Honorable Judge Harriman, the bailiff announced. What followed was less a hearing and more an execution. Jaden's lead attorney, a silver-haired man with cold eyes, efficiently presented the prenuptial agreement, highlighting the specific clauses that protected his client's assets in all circumstances. Your Honor, Tasha's attorney attempted, given the exceptional circumstances of a triplet pregnancy and Ms. Williams' current financial situation, the circumstances of conception are irrelevant to the terms agreed upon, Jaden's attorney interrupted smoothly. Mr. Thompson has generously offered a one-time payment of $10,000, despite having no legal obligation to do so. $10,000 for 3 lives, for a high-risk delivery, for the future of 3 children he had helped create. The judge scanned the documents, barely looking at Tasha's swollen form or tear-streaked face. The prenuptial appears properly executed and witnessed. I see no grounds for setting it aside. When Tasha left the courthouse, the spring rain felt appropriate, cold, relentless, indifferent to her suffering. Jaden had departed through a different exit, never once meeting her eyes during the entire proceeding. I'm sorry, her lawyer said, awkwardly patting her shoulder. The system isn't always fair. 2 weeks later, Tasha sat across from a tech recruiter at a mid-sized software company. Her resume had earned her the interview, her NYU degree and innovative hackathon projects opening the door despite her employment gap. Hope flickered briefly as the interviewer nodded appreciatively while reviewing her coding samples. These pattern recognition algorithms are impressive, he said. Your academic background is exactly what we're looking for. Then his eyes dropped to her belly, and his expression shifted subtly. The position does require some flexibility with hours. Project deadlines can be demanding. He cleared his throat. Perhaps after you resolve your personal situation, we could revisit the opportunity? The pattern repeated at 3 more interviews. No one explicitly mentioned her pregnancy, that would be illegal discrimination, but the message was clear. A single mother of triplets was a liability, not an asset. By her 8th month, desperation forced Tasha to accept what she could get: night cleaning shifts at a Wall Street office complex. The irony wasn't lost on her as she emptied trash cans and wiped down desks in the gleaming financial offices she had once dreamed of working in. Her supervisor, a sympathetic woman from the Dominican Republic, allowed her extra bathroom breaks and occasionally slipped her leftover sandwiches from executive meetings. "You too smart for this work," she would say, watching Tasha struggle to bend with her enormous belly. "But you strong. You survive." During daylight hours, Tasha worked the counter at a fast food restaurant near Times Square, standing until her ankles swelled beyond recognition, counting every meager tip. Customers complained about slow service, managers reprimanded her for bathroom breaks, and the smell of frying oil made her perpetually nauseated. But each dollar earned was one more toward the medical bills that loomed ahead. The precious few hours between jobs were spent in her cousin's apartment, hunched over a second-hand laptop, freelance typing medical transcriptions for pennies per word, and, when she could keep her eyes open, working on her algorithm idea. Sleep became a luxury she could rarely afford, catching fragmented hours whenever exhaustion overwhelmed her determination. "You need rest," her cousin would plead, watching Tasha's fingers flying across the keyboard at 3 in the morning. "Those babies need you healthy." "Those babies need a future," Tasha would reply, not looking up from the screen. The night of the Neurotech Solutions launch party came 7 months into her pregnancy. Tasha had seen the announcement in a tech blog, a triumphant feature about Jaden Thompson's revolutionary neural interface technology securing another $20 million in funding. The gala event would gather every significant investor and tech journalist in New York. She hadn't planned to go, but that morning she'd received notice that her application for emergency Medicaid had been delayed due to paperwork discrepancies. Without it, her hospital delivery would cost more than she could earn in a year. Desperation drove her to the gleaming Tribeca venue, her swollen body awkwardly wrapped in the only decent dress that still fit her. Security guards flanked the entrance, checking invitations as beautiful people in evening wear streamed past velvet ropes. "I just need to speak with Jaden Thompson for 1 minute," she explained to a stone-faced guard, trying to maintain her dignity despite her circumstances. "I'm the mother of his children." The guard's eyes flicked dismissively over her stretched dress and swollen feet. "Yeah, you and half the women in Manhattan," he snorted. "Mr. Thompson left specific instructions about you." His colleague chuckled, making no attempt to lower his voice. "Damn, she's about to pop. Thompson sure knows how to dodge a bullet." The humiliation burned hotter than any physical pain as Tasha stood there, acutely aware of curious onlookers and their pitying or contemptuous glances. Through the venue's massive windows, she could see the party in full swing, champagne flowing, celebrities mingling, success celebrated. She lingered, unable to leave, drawn to the glimpse of a life that had once almost been hers. Then she saw him, Jaden, laughing in the center of an admiring circle, his arm casually draped around a willowy model whose face had graced magazine covers. When he turned slightly, his eyes briefly met hers through the window. There was a flicker of recognition, then nothing, his gaze sliding past her as if she were invisible, turning back to his companions with an uninterrupted smile. Later that night, back in her cousin's cramped kitchen, Tasha watched the event coverage on a small television. Jaden's confident face filled the screen as he announced the additional funding round that would revolutionize how humans and technology interface. Neurotech Solutions CEO Jaden Thompson, recently named to Forbes' 30 Under 30, continues his meteoric rise, the reporter gushed. With this latest round of funding, Thompson proves that his pedigree and vision are a winning combination in today's competitive tech landscape. Tasha looked down at the coins she had emptied from her pockets, her tips from the day's work at the restaurant. $3.72. Not enough for tomorrow's bus fare and lunch. The contrast between the champagne-soaked celebration and her desperate reality felt like a physical blow. Something broke inside her then, but not in the way that leads to collapse. It broke the way a seed breaks open before it grows, the way ice breaks on a river when spring finally arrives. She touched her belly, feeling the strong movements of the 3 lives she carried. "He doesn't deserve you," she whispered. "And he's wrong about me. About us." Switching off the television, she pulled her laptop close and opened a blank document. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a moment before she began typing with newfound clarity. Project Empath, Algorithmic Emotional Pattern Recognition, Foundational Theory and Implementation by Tasha Williams. She worked through the night, pausing only when contractions, false alarms, still weeks from delivery, forced her to breathe and rest. Dawn found her still typing, surrounded by scribbled notes and diagrams. When her cousin woke, Tasha was making 3 important phone calls. To Dr. Eleanor Chen, her advanced algorithms professor at NYU. "I've been developing a theoretical framework for emotional pattern recognition that builds on my senior project. Could I send you what I have so far?" To Maya Gupta, a former classmate now working at an AI research lab. "Remember how we talked about the gap between facial recognition and true emotional understanding? I think I've found an approach." To Daniel Park, editor of a small but respected tech blog who had interviewed her years earlier. "I'm working on something that could change how machines understand human emotions. Would you be interested in discussing it?" By the time she hung up from the last call, something had changed in Tasha's posture. A straightening of the spine, a lifting of the chin. The woman who had been crushed under the weight of abandonment and poverty just hours before now radiated a quiet, determined purpose. She had nothing, no money, no support, no security for the children about to enter the world. But she had her mind, and she had found her path. The participants who would years later receive her early calls would tell reporters about the strange clarity and conviction in her voice that morning. How a heavily pregnant, destitute woman had spoken with the confidence of someone who could already see the future she would build. The people who laughed at the desperate ex with 3 babies wouldn't recognize her name when, 15 years later, it appeared on the Fortune 500 list as the founder of the most valuable algorithm of the 21st century. The morning after making her 3 pivotal phone calls, Tasha woke to an unfamiliar sensation, sharp, rhythmic pain radiating from her lower back. She glanced at the clock. 3:17 in the morning. Too early. She was barely at 34 weeks. "Not now," she whispered, pressing her palm against her swollen abdomen. "Please, not yet." But her body had other plans. By dawn, the contractions were 5 minutes apart. Her cousin drove her to Bellevue Hospital, the only facility that wouldn't turn away a patient with incomplete insurance paperwork. The emergency room was chaotic, fluorescent lights flickering above stretchers lined against walls, overworked staff rushing between patients. "Multiple pregnancy, preterm labor," the intake nurse announced, wheeling Tasha through double doors. "Get Dr. Patel." The delivery room was sterile and impersonal, a stark contrast to the Upper East Side birthing suite she had once toured with Jaden, with its soothing colors and birth tubs. Here, the equipment looked dated, the paint peeling in corners. "Where's your partner?" the nurse asked, helping Tasha change into a hospital gown. "There isn't one," Tasha replied, the words burning her throat. Complications developed quickly. Her blood pressure dropped dangerously, and the first baby was showing signs of distress. The room suddenly filled with medical personnel, voices urgent but controlled. "We need to perform an emergency C-section," Dr. Patel explained, her kind eyes the only warmth in the cold room. "We'll take good care of you and your babies." Tasha nodded, terror and determination battling within her. As they wheeled her toward the operating room, she realized with crushing clarity that there was no hand to hold, no reassuring voice to hear, no one to wait anxiously for news of the delivery. Under harsh surgical lights, through the fog of spinal anesthesia, Tasha heard the first cry, thin but fierce. "Baby A is a boy," someone announced, small but breathing well. 2 more announcements followed, each tiny cry igniting something primal and powerful within her. "Baby B, a girl. Baby C, another boy." The surgical team worked efficiently to complete the procedure while the neonatal staff attended to the newborns. When they finally placed the 3 tiny bundles on her chest, each weighing just over 4 pounds, Tasha felt her world shift on its axis. "Hello, Zion," she whispered to the first, Zara to the second, Zaire to the third. Names she had chosen for their meaning, elevated place, radiance, and river, symbols of the journey she envisioned for them. Looking into their perfect faces, so small yet so complete, Tasha made her vow, "You are my new purpose. We're going to prove that he was wrong." The early weeks passed in a blur of exhaustion unlike anything Tasha had experienced. The triplets spent their first month in the NICU, their tiny bodies connected to monitors and feeding tubes. She divided her time between the hospital and desperate attempts to prepare for their homecoming, scouring thrift stores and online forums for affordable baby equipment. Her cousin's 1-bedroom apartment underwent a makeshift transformation. The living room became a nursery, with 3 second-hand cribs taking up nearly every inch of space. Privacy became a luxury of the past, sleep an elusive memory. "I don't know how you're doing this," her cousin remarked one evening, watching Tasha simultaneously bottle-feed Zara while rocking Zion's bassinet with her foot. Zaire slept momentarily in the makeshift sling across her chest. "I don't have a choice," Tasha replied simply. Nights became her closest companion. While the city slept, Tasha existed in a strange twilight world of feedings, diaper changes, and stolen moments of work. She balanced her laptop precariously on the arm of the second-hand rocking chair, one baby at her breast, another in the crook of her arm, the third nearby in a bassinet fashioned from a dresser drawer. Her code took shape during these fragmented hours, lines written between lullabies, algorithms conceptualized during diaper changes. The apartment was a chaos of baby bottles and programming books, formula, and flowcharts. At 9 months old, during a routine pediatric checkup, the doctor's expression shifted as she observed the triplets' responses to various stimuli. "Ms. Williams, I'm noticing some concerning patterns in how your children interact with their environment," she said carefully. "They're not making consistent eye contact and their social responses are atypical for their age." Further evaluations confirmed what the pediatrician suspected. All 3 triplets showed signs of a rare developmental condition affecting their social-emotional processing, a form of atypical neurodevelopment that made recognizing and responding to emotional cues particularly challenging. "It's unusual to see it present in all 3 siblings," the specialist explained, "but with early intervention, they can develop compensatory strategies." The diagnosis felt like another impossible mountain to climb. The recommended therapies were expensive, the waiting lists for subsidized programs years long. That night, after finally getting the triplets to sleep, Tasha researched until her eyes burned, reading every paper and study she could find about social-emotional processing disorders. She watched Zara sleeping, remembering how the baby hadn't responded to her smile earlier that day, how all 3 children seemed to struggle with the basic emotional connections that came naturally to most babies. Something clicked in Tasha's exhausted mind, connecting her work with pattern recognition algorithms to what her children were experiencing. If they couldn't intuitively understand emotional expressions, perhaps technology could help translate those expressions into something they could process. The next morning, with renewed purpose, she adjusted the focus of her code. What had begun as a general emotional recognition system became more targeted, a tool specifically designed to identify, categorize, and interpret subtle facial expressions and vocal tones. "I'm going to help you understand the world," she whispered to her sleeping children, "and you're going to help me change it." The following months brought a punishing routine. Tasha worked remotely as a data entry clerk during the few hours the triplets napped simultaneously. Evenings were devoted to their developmental exercises, and nights, the precious, quiet nights, she coded her increasingly sophisticated algorithm, testing early versions on videos of facial expressions, refining and expanding its capabilities. She created simple games for the triplets, using her laptop camera to capture their faces and the program to identify their expressions. When Zion accidentally smiled during one session, the program flashed "happy" on the screen, accompanied by celebratory music. The connection delighted him, encouraging him to repeat the expression. Technology companies and incubators remained unimpressed by her outreach attempts. "Your concept has merit," one startup advisor told her after reviewing her proposal. "But without a team, without funding, and with 3 special needs infants, it's not viable. Come back when your personal situation is more conducive to entrepreneurship." The rejection stung, but each dismissal only hardened Tasha's resolve. If traditional paths were closed to her, she would forge her own. When the triplets turned 18 months old, Tasha learned about a local tech meetup featuring speakers from various AI startups. Childcare was impossible to arrange on her limited budget, so she made a bold decision. She would bring the triplets with her. The evening of the meetup, she dressed them in their cleanest clothes, packed a bag with every conceivable necessity, and maneuvered their unwieldy triple stroller onto the subway, ignoring the sighs and eye rolls of fellow passengers. Arriving at the co-working space where the event was held, Tasha immediately sensed the disapproval. Tech bros in hoodies and entrepreneurs in casual business attire cast sidelong glances at the cumbersome stroller and the 3 toddlers strapped inside. "This isn't really appropriate," the event organizer whispered, eyeing the triplets nervously. "They might disrupt the presentations." "They'll be quiet," Tasha promised, already distributing silent toys and snacks. "Please, I've been developing something important." Reluctantly allowed to stay, she positioned herself at the back of the room, one eye constantly on her children while absorbing every word from the speakers. When the floor opened for pitches from attendees, Tasha raised her hand, heart pounding. Standing before the skeptical crowd, her children miraculously cooperating in their stroller, she took a deep breath. "My name is Tasha Williams. I've developed an algorithm called Empath that recognizes micro-expressions humans often miss, potentially revolutionizing how machines understand emotions." She explained the technical foundation, the machine learning approach, the potential applications, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about the program's ability to detect emotional nuances beyond current technology. Most attendees looked bored or dismissive. One checked his watch, another scrolled through his phone. Then, from the side of the room, a question. "Have you tested this with neurodivergent subjects?" The question came from a distinguished-looking man in his 40s who had been listening intently throughout her presentation. "Yes," Tasha answered, gesturing toward her children. "My triplets have a condition affecting emotional processing. They're my primary test subjects and inspiration." The man approached after the session ended, while Tasha was wiping applesauce from Zaire's chin. "Dr. Marcus Reynolds, visiting neuroscientist from Stanford," he introduced himself, crouching down to the triplets level. "Your concept is fascinating, particularly the application for those with social-emotional processing difficulties." He handed her a business card. "Email me your research. Your idea could change lives." As Tasha pushed the stroller home that night, exhausted but hopeful, she couldn't know that the participants who had dismissed the mother with 3 babies were witnessing the birth of what would become the most valuable algorithm of the 21st century, nor that those inconvenient babies would grow into prodigies sought after by the world's best universities. Dr. Marcus Reynolds's business card felt like a talisman in Tasha's hand as she rode the subway home that night, the triplets finally dozing in their stroller after the excitement of the tech meetup. She kept taking it out, reading the embossed Stanford University logo, running her thumb over the raised letters of his name and credentials. "Your idea could change lives," he had said, not "interesting concept" or "keep working on it," the dismissive phrases she'd grown accustomed to hearing. He had seen potential where others saw only an overwhelmed single mother with an impractical dream. The next morning, Tasha composed her email to Dr. Reynolds with painstaking care, attaching her research notes, flowcharts, and early testing results. She included videos of the triplets interacting with primitive versions of the Empath interface, showing how they responded to the visual cues that translated emotional expressions into patterns they could recognize. His response came just 3 hours later. "Ms. Williams, your work is extraordinary. The application of pattern recognition principles to emotional intelligence is elegantly conceived. I'd like to invite you to present your research at Stanford's Emerging Technology Symposium next month. We can arrange accommodations for you and your children. Please call me to discuss details. Marcus Reynolds." Tasha read the email 7 times, convinced she'd misunderstood. Stanford, presentation, accommodations. The words seemed to belong to someone else's life, not to a woman who counted quarters for laundry and stretched a can of beans to last 2 meals. When she finally gathered the courage to call him Dr. Reynolds spoke as if her attendance was a foregone conclusion. "The neuroscience department has a small grant for visiting researchers," he explained. "It can cover your travel expenses and a month's stay in our visiting scholars' housing. Bring your data and your triplets. I've already spoken with our developmental psychology department about observing your work with them." 6 weeks later, Tasha stood in the cramped living room of her cousin's apartment, surveying the small collection of belongings she was taking to California. 3 battered suitcases contained all their clothes. A duffel bag held developmental toys for the triplets. Her backpack protected her precious laptop and external hard drives containing every version of the Empath code. "I still can't believe you're doing this," her cousin said, watching Tasha meticulously pack the triplets' medications and favorite comfort items. "Moving across the country with 3 toddlers, on the word of some professor you just met." "It's Stanford," Tasha replied simply. "This is our chance." The cross-country bus journey was a trial by fire. 36 hours of managing 3 active toddlers in confined spaces, apologizing to irritated passengers, changing diapers in tiny bus bathrooms, and soothing meltdowns during layovers in unfamiliar stations. By the time they reached California, Tasha was operating on pure determination, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. But the triplets' reaction to Stanford's sprawling campus made the ordeal worthwhile. Released from the confines of the bus, they toddled across open green spaces, their eyes wide with wonder at the towering palm trees and red-roofed buildings. For children who had known only the concrete constraints of city apartment living, the expanse of sky and grass seemed magical. "Bag!" Zion declared, one of his rare spoken words, as he stretched his arms wide. Their accommodations, however, were far from spacious. The visiting scholars' housing consisted of a single room with a small kitchenette and bathroom. Tasha arranged 3 small mattresses on the floor for the children, keeping her own bedding to a thin sleeping bag beside them. "It's just temporary," she reminded herself, unpacking their belongings into the room's single dresser. A stepping stone. Her first week in the neuroscience laboratory established the pattern that would dominate the next year of her life. Mornings began at 5, preparing the triplets for Stanford's subsidized daycare program. By 8, she was in the lab, diving into code refinement and testing, occasionally stealing moments to check research papers for her burgeoning idea of pursuing an MBA through night courses. At 4, she would collect the children, bringing them back to the lab where she had arranged a small play area in the corner with puzzles and developmental toys. Faculty members and graduate students would occasionally observe the triplets interacting with new iterations of the Empath program, fascinated by both the technology and the children's unique responses. "Your algorithm is identifying micro-expressions that even trained psychologists sometimes miss," commented Dr. Reynolds one evening, watching as the program correctly identified Zara's slight lip twitch as frustration rather than happiness. "The applications go far beyond what you initially envisioned." As the Empath 2.0 version took shape, incorporating more advanced machine learning capabilities, Tasha began testing it with other neurodivergent children recruited through the university's developmental clinic. The results exceeded even her optimistic projections, with children demonstrating improved emotional recognition after just weeks of interaction with the program. The breakthrough moment came 3 months into their Stanford stay. Tasha had been working late, the triplets playing quietly in their designated corner of the lab. She had just compiled a new version of the code when Zion approached her desk, pointing at her face. "Mama sad," he said clearly, his first complete sentence. Tears sprang to Tasha's eyes, not because he had spoken, but because he had correctly identified her emotional state, something the specialists had warned might take years for him to master. "That's right, baby," she whispered, pulling him close. "But now Mama happy too." When she shared this development with Dr. Reynolds the next day, he immediately recognized its significance. "This isn't just educational technology anymore, Tasha. You're creating a bridge between different neurological experiences of emotion. We need to document this formally and expand testing." Word of Tasha's work began spreading through academic circles. 6 months after arriving at Stanford, she was invited to present at a conference on assistive technology in San Jose. Standing before an audience of researchers and developers, her carefully rehearsed presentation flowed with unexpected confidence. "The Empath system doesn't just label emotions," she explained, displaying her algorithm's decision tree on the screen. "It creates a translation matrix between the subtle physical manifestations of emotions and their cognitive meaning, allowing users to build recognition patterns that work for their specific neurological framework." After her presentation, a marketing researcher approached her with unexpected questions. "Have you considered applications for consumer response analysis? Companies spend millions trying to understand emotional reactions to products, and your recognition accuracy is unprecedented." The question opened a door Tasha hadn't considered: commercial applications beyond the medical and educational contexts she'd been focused on. That evening, She began mapping potential business applications, her mind racing with possibilities. 2 weeks later, she received an email that would change everything. "Ms. Williams, I attended your presentation in San Jose. I'm an angel investor specializing in AI startups. I'd like to discuss a potential $50,000 investment in your empath technology." David Chen. $50,000. The figure seemed astronomical to someone who had been living on a research stipend and food stamps. But as Tasha researched startup costs and development needs, she quickly recognized how modest it actually was in the tech world. Barely enough for a few months of focused development and basic business establishment. She arranged to meet Chen at a coffee shop near campus, bringing the triplets along because she couldn't afford childcare on such short notice. To her surprise, the investor wasn't put off by their presence. "My brother is on the autism spectrum," he explained, watching as the children interacted with a tablet version of Empath. "I understand the value of what you're creating." His offer was straightforward: $50,000 for 25% of the company. That night, after putting the triplets to bed on their floor mattresses, Tasha sat by the window of their small room, calculating how far the money would stretch. She could rent a small workspace, pay for dedicated childcare, upgrade her equipment, and perhaps hire a part-time developer to help refine the code. It would last perhaps 5 months if she was frugal. But giving away a quarter of her company for such a modest sum felt wrong, especially when Dr. Reynolds had begun hinting at the technology's vast potential. The decision kept her awake until dawn, watching her children sleep, weighing their immediate needs against the future she envisioned. The next morning she called Chen with her counteroffer. "I'll accept your investment," she said firmly, "but for 15% equity, not 25%. And I retain complete intellectual property rights to the core algorithm." There was a pause on the line before Chen responded with a chuckle. "You drive a hard bargain for someone with 3 kids sleeping on floor mattresses." "I'm not negotiating from desperation, Mr. Chen," she replied calmly. "I'm negotiating from confidence in what I've created." 2 days later, they signed the papers. The small office that Tasha rented with her first investment barely had space for a desk and 3 child-sized chairs, but in less than a decade, the global headquarters of Horizon Technologies would occupy an entire skyscraper in Manhattan, with her name gleaming at the top. 3 years had transformed the once struggling empath prototype into a technology that was beginning to turn heads in Silicon Valley. Tasha sat in her modest office space, significantly larger than her first closet-sized rental but still humble by tech startup standards, reviewing the latest acquisition offer that had arrived that morning. The email contained the 3rd buyout proposal she'd received in as many months. $5 million for all empath technology and intellectual property, she read aloud, her voice tinged with indignation. Non-negotiable final offer. Across from her desk, the triplets were engaged in their after-school activities in the designated children's corner she maintained in every workspace. Now, 6 years old, they showed increasingly distinct personalities despite their identical starting point in life. "They always say final offer when they're actually willing to go higher," remarked Zaire without looking up from the complex number pattern he was creating with colored blocks. His mathematical intuition had become uncanny even for trained educators. Tasha smiled at her son's perception. "You're right, but it doesn't matter if they'd go to 10 million. This algorithm is worth far more than they realize." The door opened as Marcus Reynolds entered, carrying takeout containers that filled the room with the aroma of Thai food. In the 3 years since Stanford, he had transitioned from mentor to close advisor, helping Tasha navigate the complex waters of academic partnerships and commercial applications. "I see Pinewood Technologies finally made their move," he said, nodding toward her computer screen as he set down the food. $5 million is insulting." "My algorithm's value isn't just monetary," Tasha replied, watching as the triplets immediately abandoned their activities at the smell of food. "It's about long-term impact." After dinner, when the children had returned to their projects, Tasha and Marcus sat across from each other, the remnants of pad thai between them, discussing the future of empath. "We need to talk about partnership," Tasha said finally, meeting his eyes directly. "I've been considering your proposal. I need someone who truly understands what we're building." "And the equity split?" Marcus asked, his expression carefully neutral. 75-25, she replied without hesitation. "I retain controlling interest." He nodded, extending his hand. "Deal. Horizon Technologies it is." The following week, they signed the paperwork that officially created Horizon Technologies, the name suggested by Zara after watching a documentary about how the human eye perceives the line where sky meets Earth. "Because we're creating a new line between humans and technology," the 6-year-old had explained with remarkable eloquence, "where they can finally see each other clearly." That evening, Tasha spread a large sheet of paper across their dining table, watching as the triplets collaborated on drawing what would become the company logo, 3 stylized horizon lines forming an H. "This is bigger than just a company, isn't it, Mama?" Zion asked, his intuitive grasp of significance sometimes startling her. "Yes, baby," she answered, her throat tight with emotion. "This is our legacy." With the official establishment of Horizon Technologies came their first real office, a modest space in a building housing several other startups, but with actual walls, meeting rooms, and designated areas for the triplets to study and play while Tasha and Marcus worked. The children had become fixtures in the business, their unique perspectives often providing unexpected insights into the technology's applications. 3 months after moving into the new office, Tasha received a call from the principal of the specialized school the triplets attended. "Ms. Williams, I needed to speak with you about Zaire," the woman began, her tone causing Tasha's heart to clench with instinctive worry. "His math teacher conducted standard aptitude testing today and, well, we've never seen scores like this. He completed college-level calculus problems without formal training. We believe he may be one of the most gifted mathematical minds we've encountered." Similar calls followed in the coming weeks. Zion had secretly constructed a functional robot using parts salvaged from discarded toys and electronics, programmed with a rudimentary version of empath to respond to facial expressions. Zara had been found in the school library, absorbed in a graduate-level neuroanatomy textbook, taking meticulous notes on limbic system functions related to emotional processing. "They're extraordinary," Marcus remarked one evening as they worked late, the triplets sleeping on the comfortable pull-out couch Tasha had installed in her office for such occasions, just like their mother. The comment hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken feeling. They had been working side by side for years now, their professional respect evolving into friendship and something more that neither had acknowledged. Marcus moved closer, the spreadsheets on the screen forgotten as his hand brushed hers. For a moment, Tasha allowed herself to imagine possibilities, a partner who valued her mind, who adored her children, who had been there through the hardest times. Then fear seized her heart. She pulled back. "I can't risk mixing business and personal relationships again," she said quietly, the memory of Jaden's betrayal still an open wound. "There's too much at stake now." Marcus nodded, disappointment visible but respect paramount. "I understand. The company comes first." 2 months later, Tasha stood before the board of directors of Northside Children's Hospital Network, presenting the clinical trial results of empath in neurological diagnostics. The empath system detected early indicators of processing disorders with 86% accuracy, she explained, her confidence unwavering despite the room of skeptical medical administrators. That's 30% higher than current clinical observation methods. More importantly, it provides consistent results regardless of the evaluator, eliminating diagnostic bias. She clicked to the next slide, showing brain scan comparisons. And this is what makes empath unique. It doesn't just label emotions. It creates a translation matrix between the subtle physical manifestations of emotions and their cognitive meaning, allowing doctors to understand how individual patients are processing emotional data. The questions were rigorous, challenging, occasionally bordering on hostile, but Tasha had prepared meticulously, understanding that the medical establishment would be the hardest to convince. 3 days later, Marcus burst into her office waving a document. They signed $7.8 million for the hospital network implementation. The contract represented more than money. It was validation, proof that Empath could transcend from interesting technology to life-changing tool. That evening they celebrated in the office, Marcus popping champagne while the triplets clinked plastic cups of apple juice. "To the future of Horizon," Marcus toasted, his eyes meeting Tasha's with warmth and pride. Later that night, after tucking the excited children into bed in their new apartment, the first truly comfortable home they'd had since the triplets' birth, Tasha found herself leafing through a business magazine she'd picked up earlier. A familiar face caught her eye. Jaden Thompson, featured in a profile of rising tech leaders. The article praised his innovative approach to neural interfaces and prestigious background, with no mention of personal life or family. The photo showed him standing confidently beside a sleek prototype, expression smug, tie perfectly knotted. His neurotech solutions had secured significant funding for early-stage testing. For a moment, old pain threatened to surface. Then Tasha noticed something that made her smile. In the photo background, barely visible on a monitor, was a code structure that looked remarkably similar to an early, flawed version of her own emotion recognition algorithm. If his company was attempting to replicate her work, they were years behind and building on an unstable foundation. She slipped the magazine into a drawer, refusing to let his image disturb her peace. Instead, she went to check on her children, opening their bedroom door quietly to watch them sleep. Zion, the builder, his hands still holding the small robot he'd been improving. Zara, the scientist, surrounded by books even in sleep. Zaire, the pattern finder, whose mathematical brilliance would someday change how the world understood prediction models. "You are my greatest creation," she whispered to their sleeping forms. "Far more important than any algorithm." As she closed the drawer containing the magazine with Jaden's photo, Tasha couldn't know that the algorithm she had created to help her children recognize emotions would be the same tool that would one day expose the falsity of the man who abandoned them to the entire world. As she closed the drawer containing the magazine with Jaden's photo, Tasha couldn't know that the algorithm she had created to help her children recognize emotions would be the same tool that would one day expose the falsity of the man who abandoned them to the entire world. 5 years passed, transforming both Horizon Technologies and the Williams family in ways that even Tasha's forward-thinking mind couldn't have predicted. The modest office space had evolved into an impressive 3-floor headquarters in Palo Alto, housing 200 employees dedicated to refining and expanding the Empath technology. What had begun as a tool for neurodivergent children had become a sophisticated platform used across healthcare, security, and education sectors. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Tasha's corner office as she reviewed quarterly projections with her executive team. At 36, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had proven her worth many times over. The integration with Memorial Hospital's psychiatric unit has exceeded expectations by 30%, reported her head of medical partnerships. They're requesting expansion to 3 additional facilities. Tasha nodded, making notes on her tablet. Schedule a meeting with their board next week. I want to understand their implementation process before we scale. Down the hall, in the specially designed innovation lab that had become the triplets' domain after school, 11-year-old Zion was putting the finishing touches on his entry for the National Robotics Competition. His creation, a companion robot that used Empath technology to recognize and respond to anxiety signals in children, had already advanced through regional finals, beating teams from prestigious high schools and even some college entries. "The facial scan needs to be more sensitive around the eye area," he muttered to himself, adjusting code with the precision of a seasoned programmer. "That's where micro-expressions begin." In the adjacent workstation, Zara was engaged in a video conference with a Stanford neuroscience professor, discussing her co-authored paper on emotional response patterns in the prefrontal cortex. At 11, her understanding of neurological processes had become so advanced that respected researchers sought her input on their work. The correlation between subconscious emotional processing and pupil dilation isn't incidental, she explained with remarkable articulation. Our data suggests it's a predictive indicator. Meanwhile, Zaire sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by screens displaying complex market trend visualizations. His algorithmic prediction model, originally developed as a personal project to understand pattern propagation, had caught the attention of Horizon's financial team when it accurately predicted market fluctuations 3 consecutive quarters. After the executive meeting concluded, Tasha found Marcus waiting by her office door, his expression unusually serious. "Venture capital partners just called," he said once they were alone. "They're prepared to offer $120 million for 40% equity." Tasha's breath caught. It was the largest offer they'd received to date, enough capital to fund global expansion, accelerate research, secure Horizon's place as an industry leader. But 40% would mean surrendering controlling interest when combined with existing investors. "What's your assessment?" she asked, valuing Marcus's business acumen as much as his scientific expertise. "The money would accelerate growth dramatically," he acknowledged. "But diluting your stake below 50% means potential loss of strategic control." Before she could respond, her tablet pinged with an urgent alert from their competitive intelligence team. The report contained screenshots from a press release. BioSync Innovations, Jaden Thompson's company, announcing a revolutionary emotion machine interface scheduled for demonstration next quarter. "They're moving into our territory," Marcus observed, studying the announcement over her shoulder. Tasha enlarged the technical specifications section, her experienced eyes immediately identifying flaws in the approach. "Their foundation is fundamentally unsound. They're building on outdated pattern recognition principles." "But their marketing is powerful," Marcus pointed out. "Thompson has connections throughout the investment community. Perception sometimes matters more than technical superiority." That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Tasha and Marcus sat on her apartment balcony overlooking the bay, the investment offer and competitive threat weighing heavily between them. "If we take the VC money, we grow faster, potentially squash BioSync before they gain traction," Marcus reasoned. "But you lose majority control." Tasha watched the distant lights of ships moving through the darkness. "And if we maintain control?" "Slower growth, potentially harder fight against competitors. But the company remains truly yours. Your vision, your decisions." The unspoken alternative hung in the air, taking the company public. Riskier, but potentially allowing them to raise capital while maintaining controlling interest. "There's another option," Tasha said finally. "We file for IPO instead." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "That's significantly more complicated. More scrutiny, more regulations." "And more independence," she countered. "If we're going to build something that lasts, that truly changes how humans and technology interact, we need to maintain our core vision." Their conversation shifted, as it often did during these late-night strategy sessions, from purely professional to something more personal. The chemistry between them had grown over the years, despite Tasha's initial reluctance. "You never talk about him," Marcus said quietly. "The children's father." Tasha stiffened slightly. "There's nothing to say. He made his choice." "The children ask me sometimes, you know. Not directly, but in roundabout ways." She turned to him, surprised. "What do they ask?" "Zion wanted to know if all biological fathers leave. Zara asked if I ever thought about having my own children instead of spending time with them. Zaire calculated the statistical likelihood of a man staying with a woman pregnant with multiples." Tears pricked at Tasha's eyes. "What did you tell them?" "The truth. that some men make terrible choices they later regret, that I consider spending time with them a privilege, not a burden, and that statistics can't predict individual human decency. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotion. This time, when Marcus's hand covered hers, Tasha didn't pull away. "I've been afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of trusting, of mixing business and personal life, of risking everything we've built." "I know," he said simply. "I've been willing to wait." Their first kiss, when it finally happened, felt like the natural conclusion to a conversation years in the making. Tentative at first, then deepening with the recognition of something that had been building since those early days at Stanford. The following morning brought the triplets' enthusiastic approval of the development. Zaire, ever the pragmatist, declared, "It was statistically inevitable and optimal for group dynamics. Also, it's about time." Zara hugged Marcus fiercely. "Does this mean you'll be here every morning now?" "Only if that's what all of you want," he answered carefully, looking to Tasha. "We'll figure it out together," she promised, the unfamiliar sensation of complete family happiness settling over her. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of IPO preparations. Tasha presented to investment banks, impressing analysts with her technical knowledge and clear business vision. Marcus managed operational preparations while the legal team worked through regulatory requirements. The night before filing, the newly formed family gathered in the living room, surrounded by prospectus documents and financial projections. "Are you nervous, Mom?" Zion asked, noticing Tasha's restless energy. "A little," she admitted. "This is a big step. Your algorithm has a 97% accuracy rate in controlled settings," Zara pointed out. "That's unprecedented. And our revenue growth has exceeded industry averages for 12 consecutive quarters," added Zaire. "The market valuation models suggest strong investor confidence." Marcus laughed. "Only in this family would 11-year-olds offer stock market analysis as reassurance." "You always taught us to believe in our value," Zion said simply. "Why wouldn't the market do the same?" The next morning, Tasha stood on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the triplets beside her in matching outfits, Marcus's steady presence at her back. When she rang the opening bell, Horizon Technologies' stock opened 43% above the expected price, instantly valuing the company at over $15 billion. On that same morning, in his Boston office at BioSync Innovations, Jaden Thompson watched the financial news with growing unease. The reporter's enthusiastic coverage of today's most successful tech IPO of the year caught his attention. Horizon Technologies, the emotional intelligence platform revolutionizing multiple industries, has seen its shares soar in early trading, the announcer explained as B-roll footage showed a confident woman in an elegant suit surrounded by 3 well-dressed children. Jaden leaned closer to the screen, something vaguely familiar about the woman's profile triggering a distant memory. But he couldn't place her, couldn't recognize the mother of his children, couldn't fathom that the empire being celebrated was built by the woman he had once declared would never be anything but a burden. The day Horizon Technologies shares surged 43% in their market debut, Jaden Thompson watched the financial news in his BioSync office, not recognizing the powerful woman on screen as the same one he had abandoned pregnant with his children, an ignorance that would be short-lived. The day Horizon Technologies shares surged 43% in their market debut, Jaden Thompson watched the financial news in his BioSync office, not recognizing the powerful woman on screen as the same one he had abandoned pregnant with his children, an ignorance that would be short-lived. 4 years after that successful IPO, the technological landscape had shifted dramatically. Horizon Technologies had evolved from a promising newcomer to an undisputed leader in emotional intelligence platforms, with a global workforce exceeding 2,000 employees and a market capitalization that placed it firmly among the tech elite. The morning sun cast dramatic shadows across the gleaming 60-story Horizon headquarters in San Francisco, a stunning architectural achievement of sustainable design that had won multiple awards for its carbon-neutral footprint and employee-centered spaces. Inside the executive penthouse suite, Tasha Williams conducted her weekly leadership meeting with characteristic precision. The neuropsychiatry integration has exceeded projections by 17% this quarter, she noted, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had become her trademark. At 41, Tasha had evolved into a formidable executive whose presence commanded respect without demanding it. We'll need to accelerate the server expansion in Singapore to handle Asia-Pacific growth. Marcus Reynolds, now CEO to Tasha's role as founder and chief innovation officer, made notes in his leather-bound journal. Their professional partnership had deepened alongside their personal relationship, creating a leadership dynamic that industry analysts often cited as key to Horizon's success. The empath integration with rehabilitative medicine is showing particularly strong results, he added. Stroke recovery patients using the interface are progressing 23% faster than control groups. After the meeting, Tasha took the private elevator to the 15th floor, the entire level dedicated to what employees affectionately called the Prodigy Lab. Inside, the triplets, now 15, were engaged in their respective projects, each having carved out specialized domains that complemented Horizon's core technology. Zion stood before a holographic display, manipulating the design of a neuroadaptive prosthetic limb that incorporated empath technology to create sensory feedback that mimicked natural feeling. At 15, he had already filed 3 patents and been featured in Scientific American's Innovators Under 20 list. The neural feedback loop still has a 4-millisecond delay, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Unacceptable for fine motor control. Across the lab, Zara led a team meeting with researchers twice her age, pointing to brain scan comparisons on a large display wall. Her work mapping emotional response patterns had become foundational in several emerging psychiatric treatments. The limbic activation sequence precedes conscious recognition by approximately 3 seconds, she explained to the attentive group. That gives us a predictive window to potentially interrupt harmful response patterns. In the finance modeling section, Zaire sat surrounded by AI-enhanced data visualizations, his algorithms tracking and predicting market responses to emotional triggers with uncanny accuracy. What had begun as a childhood fascination with patterns had evolved into a sophisticated market intelligence system that major financial institutions paid millions to access. "Mom," he called, noticing Tasha's arrival. The predictive model just flagged something interesting. BioSync's stock dropped 12% after their product demonstration yesterday. Tasha moved to his station, studying the complex visualization. What happened at the demonstration? Technical failure during their live test. The neural interface caused feedback loops in 3 test subjects. Nothing dangerous, but embarrassing and revealing of fundamental design flaws. The mention of BioSync caught Tasha's attention in a way most competitors wouldn't. Though she rarely acknowledged it openly, she maintained awareness of Jaden Thompson's company through standard competitive intelligence channels, not from vindictiveness, but from pragmatic business sense. That afternoon, a Fortune magazine photographer set up equipment in Tasha's office for the cover shoot that had been scheduled weeks earlier. The feature article, titled "The Woman Who Decoded Emotions," would highlight Horizon's revolutionary impact across multiple industries. "I still don't understand why this requires so much fuss," Tasha complained quietly to Marcus as the photographer's assistant adjusted lighting. "The technology should be the focus, not me." "The world needs faces behind innovation," Marcus reminded her, "especially faces that challenge the typical Silicon Valley stereotype. You're inspiring a generation of young women in tech." The photographer, a celebrated portrait artist whose work regularly appeared in prestigious publications, directed Tasha with professional efficiency. "Slightly turn your shoulder. Perfect. Now look directly at the camera. Confidence, but approachable." When the magazine hit newsstands 3 weeks later, the cover was striking. Tasha standing before a stylized visualization of the empath neural network, her expression combining intellectual intensity with quiet assurance. The headline read, "The Woman Who Decoded Emotions and Built an Empire." Inside, the 12-page feature detailed Horizon's meteoric rise, the revolutionary impact of the empath algorithm, and included a sidebar highlighting the extraordinary achievements of the prodigy Triplets, who were already making names for themselves in their respective fields. 3,000 miles away, in the Boston headquarters of BioSync Innovations, Jaden Thompson's executive assistant placed the new issue of Fortune on his desk along with his morning coffee. "Thought you might want to see this," she said. "They're calling Horizon the emotional intelligence equivalent of early Google." Jaden nodded absently, too preoccupied with damage control following their failed product demonstration to pay much attention. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when a board member mentioned "that Williams woman on the Fortune cover," that he finally picked up the magazine. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering on his imported marble floor as recognition dawned in stages. First, a vague familiarity in the woman's confident gaze. Then, the surname that he had somehow never connected to his past. Finally, the sidebar featuring 3 teenage prodigies whose familiar features hit him like a physical blow. "Williams," he whispered, memories cascading through his mind. "Tasha Williams." He frantically flipped through the article, searching for confirmation. There it was, in a brief biographical note. Founder Tasha Williams, a computer science graduate from NYU, developed the initial empath algorithm while raising triplets as a single mother. Jaden hurled the magazine across his office with a roar of disbelief. How did we not know this? How did no one make this connection? His CFO, alarmed by the outburst, stood awkwardly in the doorway. "Sir, get me everything on Horizon Technologies and Tasha Williams," Jaden demanded. "Every article, every interview, every public filing. Now!" Hours later, surrounded by printouts and digital files, the full picture emerged with devastating clarity. The woman he had abandoned 15 years ago, the burden he had discarded, had built a technology empire now valued at $42 billion. The bastards he had rejected were acknowledged prodigies making headlines in their own right. And most devastating of all, the core technology that had made her billions was fundamentally similar to what BioSync had been struggling to develop for years. Only her implementation was elegantly superior, her vision more comprehensive, her execution flawless. That same evening, in her San Francisco penthouse, Tasha received an urgent report from Horizon's intelligence team. The analysis contained detailed information about BioSync's financial troubles following their failed demonstration, declining stock value, canceled partnerships, and rumors of layoffs. Their entire strategy was built around this neural interface, Marcus observed, reviewing the report with her. Without it, they have no clear path forward. They invested everything in hardware that requires invasive procedures, Tasha noted. Meanwhile, we focused on non-invasive software solutions that achieve better results. The financial assessment was unequivocal. BioSync's market value had plummeted 70% over 18 months. Their cash reserves were dwindling, and major investors were withdrawing support. Zaire entered with his own analysis, compiled independently. Their burn rate suggests they'll need additional funding within 4 months to remain operational. No venture capital firm will touch them after 3 consecutive failed product launches. Tasha studied her son's meticulous projections, an idea forming. What would happen if someone acquired them now, at their lowest valuation? You'd get their patent portfolio for perhaps 15 cents on the dollar, Zaire calculated instantly. Their hardware design has fundamental flaws, but some of their neuroscience research has merit as complementary technology to empath. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting what I think you are?" Tasha's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a spark of something rarely seen. Not vindictiveness, but perhaps a recognition of cosmic symmetry. It makes strategic sense to eliminate a competitor while acquiring potentially valuable intellectual property. The following morning, she called an emergency board meeting. As directors filed into the conference room, Tasha presented the acquisition proposal with cool professionalism. BioSync's current market valuation makes them an unusually cost-effective acquisition target, she explained, advancing through detailed slides of financial projections. Their patent portfolio complements our research initiatives, and eliminating a direct competitor strengthens our market position. One director leaned forward. Their technology has proven unreliable. Why acquire failure? We're not acquiring their failed implementation, Tasha clarified. We're acquiring their research foundation and redirecting it within our proven framework. After the presentation, Marcus found Tasha alone in her office, staring out at the San Francisco skyline. "You didn't mention the personal connection," he observed. "It wasn't relevant to the business decision," she replied. "Wasn't it?" Tasha turned to face him, honesty replacing her professional mask. "I need to be honest. There is a personal element to this acquisition." Marcus nodded, understanding without judgment. "What do you want me to tell the acquisition team?" "Make a discreet offer below market value," she instructed. "They're desperate. They'll accept." While signing the authorization for the buyout offer of BioSync, Tasha couldn't imagine that in just 2 weeks she would be face-to-face with Jaden Thompson at Manhattan's most prestigious event, with both their fates about to be reversed before the elite who had once rejected her. While signing the authorization for the buyout offer of BioSync, Tasha couldn't imagine that in just 2 weeks she would be face-to-face with Jaden Thompson at Manhattan's most prestigious event, with both their fates about to be reversed before the elite who had once rejected her. The Horizon Tower penthouse hummed with quiet intensity as preparations for the Metropolitan Gala reached their final stage. Tasha stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York City spread beneath her like a glittering tapestry. Her reflection showed a woman transformed from the desperate, pregnant girl abandoned in the snow 15 years earlier, power suit replaced by an elegant Versace gown in a deep, unapologetic red. "The acquisition documents are complete," Marcus said, entering with a leather portfolio. "BioSync's board approved our offer unanimously. We'll announce it tomorrow night at the gala." Tasha nodded, her focus momentarily distant. "Has anyone from BioSync reached out directly?" Their lawyers handled everything. Thompson hasn't made any personal contact." She wondered if Jaden had connected the dots yet, if he realized who was systematically dismantling his company. The thought brought neither joy nor vindication, only a strange sense of completion, like a complex equation finally balanced. Across the city, in a significantly less impressive hotel suite, Jaden Thompson adjusted his bow tie with trembling fingers. The last 2 weeks had been a nightmare of cascading failures. First, the disastrous product demonstration, then investors pulling out. Finally, the humiliating board meeting where he'd been informed of the acquisition. Not consulted, merely informed. "Your talking points for tonight," his assistant said, placing a document on the bed. "Focus on the potential partnerships with Asian investors. It's our last chance to attract capital before the Horizon deal finalizes." Jaden stared at his reflection, noting the new lines around his eyes, the slight slackness in his once sharp jawline. At 43, he looked a decade older, worn down by successive failures and desperate attempts to save his crumbling company. "Who exactly is behind Horizon?" he asked, the question that had consumed him since seeing the fortune cover. "I mean personally, this Tasha Williams." His assistant scrolled through her tablet. "Limited personal information available. Graduated New York University Computer Science. Single mother to triplets, now 15. Built empath algorithm while raising them alone. No mention of the children's father." Jaden swallowed hard. "And they'll be at the gala tonight? The children too?" "Yes. The Williams triplets are minor celebrities in tech circles, child prodigies. They typically accompany their mother to major events. His children." he would see his children tonight. The thought made him physically ill with a combination of anxiety and a strange, unwelcome longing. 15 years of absence compressed into what would inevitably be a public encounter. Back at the Horizon penthouse, Tasha helped Zara adjust the elegant sapphire pendant that complemented her midnight blue gown. At 15, her daughter had blossomed into a striking young woman with her mother's grace and determination. "Are you nervous about tonight?" Zara asked, studying her mother's reflection in the mirror. "Why would I be nervous? It's just another business event." Zara, with her extraordinary emotional intelligence, raised an eyebrow. "Mom, I help develop emotional micro-expression detection algorithms. I know when someone's experiencing anticipatory anxiety." Tasha smiled, caught. There might be some complicated interactions tonight. From the doorway, Zion adjusted his cufflinks, a gift from Marcus on his last birthday. "Is this about the BioSync acquisition or something else?" "Both," Tasha admitted. "The business world is watching this acquisition closely." Zaire appeared, already impeccably dressed, his analytical mind clearly processing something. "I've been reviewing historical market responses to similar acquisitions. Our stock should see a 7 to 12% increase following the announcement." Tasha exchanged a glance with Marcus, who had joined them in the hallway. They had decided not to tell the triplets about their biological father's potential presence at the gala, not to hide information, but to prevent unnecessary emotional strain before such a public event. "You all look perfect," Marcus said, his eyes lingering on Tasha with unmistakable admiration. "The car is waiting." As their private elevator descended, Tasha felt a momentary disorientation, the present overlapping with the past. 15 years ago, she had stood in a cramped bathroom in Harlem, trying to make a second-hand maternity dress presentable enough to beg her ex-husband for help. Tonight, she would enter the same social sphere not as a supplicant, but as one of its most powerful members. "Remember," she told the triplets as the elevator reached the lobby, "no matter what happens tonight, we face it together, as a family." Across town, Jaden's taxi inched through Manhattan traffic. He had canceled the car service, another cost-cutting measure as BioSync hemorrhaged cash. The irony wasn't lost on him, heading to an event celebrating technology elites in a yellowed cab that smelled faintly of fast food and air freshener. "The Metropolitan Museum of Art," he told the driver, checking his watch nervously. His mind raced with potential scenarios. Would Tasha acknowledge their past? Would she publicly humiliate him? Most unsettling, would his children know who he was? Had she told them about the man who had abandoned them before birth? The majestic facade of the Metropolitan Museum came into view, illuminated dramatically against the night sky. A red carpet stretched from the curb to the entrance, flanked by photographers and reporters. Sleek black limousines disgorged passengers in formal attire, each arrival triggering camera flashes. Jaden paid the taxi driver and straightened his jacket, Armani, but from 3 seasons ago, the best he could manage given BioSync's financial state. As he approached the carpet, a CNBC reporter recognized him. "Mr. Thompson, a moment please. BioSync's stock has fallen 70% this year. What's your plan for recovery?" Forcing a confident smile, Jaden launched into his practiced response about strategic reorganization and promising partnership discussions, painfully aware of how hollow the words sounded. Mid-interview, a noticeable shift in energy rippled through the crowd. Camera flashes intensified as a limousine, longer and more elegant than the others, pulled up at the beginning of the carpet. Marcus Reynolds emerged first, his distinguished presence commanding immediate respect. Jaden felt his throat constrict as he watched the CEO of Horizon Technologies extend his hand back toward the vehicle's interior. Then she appeared. Tasha Williams stepped onto the red carpet, the crimson of her gown catching the light like liquid fire. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo that accentuated her graceful neck and the subtle diamond earrings that caught the camera flashes. The years had transformed her from pretty to magnificent, confidence emanating from her like a tangible force. "That's Tasha Williams, Chief Innovation Officer of Horizon Technologies," the reporter explained enthusiastically, completely forgetting Jaden mid-interview. "The woman behind the empath emotional recognition system that's revolutionized everything from mental health treatment to security protocols." Jaden couldn't respond, couldn't even breathe properly as he watched three elegant teenagers emerge from the same vehicle. Two young men and a young woman, all dressed in complementary formal wear that subtly coordinated with Tasha's gown. "And those are the famous prodigy triplets," the reporter continued, oblivious to Jaden's distress. "Zion Williams just won the National Robotics Championship, while his sister Zara published a groundbreaking paper on neuroplasticity at 15. The youngest, Zaire, is already known for his market prediction algorithm that outperforms professional analysts." Jaden stared, transfixed by the faces that carried unmistakable echoes of his own features: Zion's jawline, Zara's eyes, Zaire's profile. His children, his biological children, the ones he had called bastards who would drain his money, were now celebrated prodigies, their achievements already eclipsing many adults' lifetime accomplishments. "Excuse me," he muttered to the confused reporter, abandoning the interview mid-sentence. Inside the grand hall, Jaden maneuvered desperately through clusters of executives and celebrities, his eyes never leaving Tasha and her entourage. She moved with practiced ease through the social landscape, greeted warmly by tech titans and financial magnates who had once been his allies. When he finally managed to position himself near her, she was deep in conversation with the CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, discussing what sounded like a multi-billion-dollar implementation of empath in clinical trials. "We're prepared to offer $2.8 billion for the 5-year licensing agreement," the pharmaceutical executive was saying. "Your emotional response detection could revolutionize how we evaluate drug efficacy." "We'll consider the offer," Tasha replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who could afford to deliberate over billions. Gathering his courage, Jaden stepped forward. "Tasha." She turned slowly, her expression revealing nothing as their eyes met for the first time in 15 years. If she was surprised by his appearance, the subtle signs of aging and strain, she didn't show it. "Jaden Thompson," she said, her voice cool and controlled. "What a coincidence." The Meridian CEO, sensing the tension, excused himself discreetly. You look incredible," Jaden stammered, suddenly acutely aware of his outdated suit and the desperate energy he must be projecting. "Thank you," she replied, with the polite indifference one might offer a stranger. "Those are they our children?" he asked, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Tasha's perfectly sculpted eyebrow rose slightly. "Those are my children, Jaden, exclusively mine." While Tasha received applauding stockholders across the room, the triplets watched their mother from a distance, unaware that their biological father was the nervous man who kept glancing in their direction. Meanwhile, two separate teams of publicists finalized preparations for tomorrow's announcements, one celebrating an empire's expansion, the other managing a company's quiet dissolution. While the two limousines converged on the Metropolitan Museum that night, one carrying a united family built on determination, the other transporting a desperate man clinging to the remnants of his empire, the stage was set for a reckoning that New York wouldn't soon forget. While the two limousines converged on the Metropolitan Museum that night, one carrying a united family built on determination, the other transporting a desperate man clinging to the remnants of his empire, the stage was set for a reckoning that New York wouldn't soon forget. The Metropolitan Museum of Art glowed against the Manhattan skyline, its neoclassical facade transformed by strategic lighting into a temple of modern power. A constant procession of black vehicles disgorged the elite of technology, finance, and media onto the red carpet, where photographers jostled for position, their flashes creating a storm of artificial lightning. Jaden Thompson shifted uncomfortably as Tasha's perfectly composed features revealed nothing of the turmoil he felt. The controlled neutrality of her expression was more devastating than any anger could have been. "I know that I made a terrible mistake," he continued hastily, lowering his voice as curious onlookers began to notice their interaction. "But now that I see how extraordinary they are, perhaps it's time I got to know my children." The smile that formed on Tasha's lips contained no warmth. It was winter in Manhattan again, 15 years compressed into a single expression. "They aren't your children, Jaden. You signed documents relinquishing all rights when you declared them an unwanted financial burden." Her voice rose slightly, attracting the attention of nearby guests. "They are the children of a man who was present for every ultrasound, every night fever, every first step." Jaden flinched as his own words returned to haunt him. Before he could respond, Marcus Reynolds approached, placing a protective hand on Tasha's waist. "Any problem, darling?" he asked, his eyes fixed on Jaden with immediate recognition. "None," Tasha replied, turning toward her fiancé. "Mr. Thompson was just introducing himself." The contrast between the two men couldn't have been more stark. Marcus, distinguished and confident in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, emanated the quiet assurance of earned success. Jaden, in his visibly dated Armani, projected the desperate energy of someone watching their life's work disintegrate. Across the room, the triplets observed the interaction with curiosity. Zion, adjusting his cufflinks, a gesture unconsciously mirroring Marcus's habitual movement, leaned toward his brother. "Who's that man talking to Mom? He looks stressed." "I think he's the founder of that company she's acquiring," Zaire replied, his analytical gaze assessing Jaden with detached interest. BioSync's stock dropped another 8% today after news of their executive exodus leaked. Zara, always the most emotionally perceptive of the three, narrowed her eyes. "There's something familiar about him. The way he stands reminds me of you, Zion." Their observations were interrupted as the event organizer approached. "They're ready for the keynote presentation in 5 minutes, Ms. Williams," she informed Tasha, who nodded acknowledgement. Jaden, seeing his opportunity slipping away, stepped closer. "Wait," he whispered urgently. "I need to speak with you about BioSync. I've heard rumors that Horizon is considering an acquisition. We could work together, Tasha. A partnership would benefit everyone." She paused, turning slowly to face him. The entire room seemed to fade into background noise as their eyes locked. "Partnership?" she repeated, a soft laugh escaping her that echoed like a death knell for Jaden's hopes. "There is no partnership to consider, Jaden. Horizon acquired BioSync last week for a fraction of its initial valuation. That's what I'm announcing tonight." The world collapsed around Jaden as he processed her words. His company, his legacy, everything he had worked for during the past 15 years now belonged to the woman he had discarded as insufficient. "You can't," he began, but the words died in his throat as he recognized the futility of his protest. "I already have," Tasha replied simply. "Business is business after all. Isn't that what you taught me?" As she walked away to prepare for her speech, Jaden remained frozen in place, the magnitude of his complete defeat washing over him in sickening waves. Not only had he lost a family 15 years ago, a loss whose significance he was only now beginning to comprehend, but he had now lost his professional identity, his corporate creation, his last claim to significance. The event coordinator's voice came through the sound system, requesting attendees to take their seats for the keynote address. Jaden moved mechanically toward the back of the grand hall, his legs unsteady as he lowered himself into a chair. From this vantage point, he could see Tasha ascend the steps to the podium, her red gown catching the spotlight like a flame. "Good evening," she began, her voice clear and commanding. "Tonight marks an important milestone in Horizon Technology's mission to transform how humans and machines understand each other." The presentation screen behind her illuminated with the Horizon logo, morphing into a complex neural network visualization. Jaden watched with growing horror as she methodically outlined not just the acquisition of BioSync Innovations, but her plans for its complete restructuring. "The BioSync name will be retired," she explained to the attentive audience. "The technology will be incorporated into our neuroempath division, correcting the fundamental design flaws that prevented its success." Each word was a precise incision into Jaden's professional pride. As Tasha detailed BioSync's technical shortcomings, flaws he had repeatedly refused to acknowledge, executives and investors around him exchanged knowing glances. His reputation was being dismantled as methodically as his company. When the speech concluded to enthusiastic applause, Jaden found himself surrounded not by potential investors, but by reporters eager for a comment on the hostile takeover. "Mr. Thompson, how does it feel seeing your company absorbed by Horizon? Is it true that Tasha Williams was your wife years ago? Why did BioSync fail to deliver on its promises to investors?" The commotion attracted the attention of the triplets, who observed the scene from the refreshment area with undisguised curiosity. Zion, the tallest of the three, leaned toward his brother. "Who is that man they're interviewing?" "I think he's the founder of the company Mom just bought," Zaire answered, studying Jaden with interest. It was Zara, however, the most intuitive of the three, who frowned slightly. "He looks familiar somehow." Noticing the teenager's interest, Marcus approached discreetly. "Come, your grandparents just arrived and are eager to see you." The grandparents were Marcus's parents, who had embraced the triplets as their own grandchildren since he had entered Tasha's life. The contrast couldn't have been more painful for Jaden, who watched his biological children being guided away toward a family he didn't know. Later that evening, in the hotel bar where he was staying, Jaden faced his new reality. His phone wouldn't stop receiving notifications, investors withdrawing support, partners canceling meetings, his current fiancée questioning what had really happened between him and that Horizon executive. It was there, sunk deep into his third whiskey, that Zion found him. "Mr. Thompson?" Jaden looked up to find a young man strikingly similar to himself at 15 standing before him. "You're Zion," he murmured, unable to disguise the emotion in his voice. "Yes," the teenager replied, sitting down uninvited. "I have a question." "Anything," Jaden responded eagerly. Was the main problem with BioSync's neural chip the filtering algorithm or the physical interface with nerve tissue? The technical question caught Jaden off guard. It wasn't what he expected from his first encounter with his son. "A bit of both, but mainly the algorithm," he answered honestly. "Why?" "Because I'm developing a hybrid solution for neural interfaces as my MIT project, and I wanted to understand where you went wrong." The response was practical, devoid of emotion. "Thank you for the information." As Zion stood to leave, Jaden couldn't contain himself. "You know who I am, don't you? Beyond the founder of BioSync?" The young man paused, studying him with analytical eyes that resembled Tasha's too closely. "Mom never hid anything from us. We know our complete history, including your part in it," he answered calmly. "But if you're wondering if I'm interested in some kind of belated paternal relationship, the answer is no. I have a father, the man who was there for every important moment of my life." The cruelty of indifference was far worse than any anger or resentment Jaden could have imagined. His own son treated him as a stranger of merely academic interest. While Tasha celebrated with her family and closest colleagues in a private room elsewhere in the hotel, Jaden sat alone, staring into his empty glass. The empire she had built from the ashes of his abandonment wasn't just larger than anything he had achieved, it was a testament to the indomitable spirit of a woman who had transformed pain into power. The empire she had built from the ashes of his abandonment wasn't just larger than anything he had achieved. It was a testament to the indomitable spirit of a woman who had transformed pain into power. By morning, the Metropolitan Gala's aftermath spread through financial news and social media like wildfire. What had begun as standard coverage of a high-profile acquisition quickly evolved into something more sensational as journalists connected the dots between Tasha Williams and Jaden Thompson. The Wall Street Journal's front page featured a devastating analysis. Horizon acquires BioSync. The reunion, 15 years in the making. The article meticulously detailed not just the business transaction but the personal history that preceded it. Sources close to both parties confirmed that Williams and Thompson were briefly married 15 years ago, the article stated clinically. Court records show Thompson filed for divorce upon learning of Williams' triplet pregnancy, formally relinquishing all parental rights to focus on his career. Tasha set the newspaper aside in her penthouse suite, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan in gold. She had neither confirmed nor denied the reports, maintaining the dignified silence that had become her trademark in personal matters. "The PR team is requesting guidance," Marcus said, joining her at the window. "They've received 78 media inquiries since midnight." "Tell them our standard response applies," she replied. "Horizon doesn't comment on executives' personal lives. The acquisition stands on its business merits alone." In his considerably less luxurious hotel room, Jayden sat surrounded by newspaper clippings and online printouts, each headline more damaging than the last. His phone had been ringing incessantly. Board members demanding explanations, investors expressing outrage, his fiancée's tearful accusations. "You abandoned pregnant triplets, and you never told me?" The Italian model's voice had cracked with disbelief before she hung up, another casualty of his past decisions. Desperation drove him to make one last attempt. Using contacts from his diminishing network, he obtained Tasha's private number and called with trembling hands. "Please," he begged when she answered with cool professionalism. "We need to talk. About the children. About the future." "There's nothing to discuss, Jayden," Tasha replied, her voice serene. "You made your decision 15 years ago and I made mine. Each of us is living with the consequences of those choices. I can change. I can be part of their lives now." "The question isn't whether you can change," she responded. "It's that it no longer matters. Not to me, not to them. We've built a complete life that simply has no space for you." The most devastating aspect wasn't hatred or revenge. It was the genuine indifference in her voice. Tasha Williams had moved forward so completely that Jayden Thompson was no longer even a scar in her life, merely a footnote. 3 days later, while cleaning out his office at the former BioSync headquarters, Jayden found an invitation mixed among papers destined for shredding. Elegant cream cardstock announced the wedding of Tasha Williams and Marcus Reynolds, scheduled for 3 months hence at Lake Como, Italy. The invitation wasn't addressed to him. It had been sent to BioSync's financial director, but something caught his attention: the names of the hosts. Tasha Williams and her children, Zion, Zara, and Zaire Williams, together with Marcus Reynolds, invite you to celebrate their union. The children were co-hosting the wedding. In that moment, Jayden understood he had lost not just the empire he had dreamed of building, but a true family. Something that the money and power he had so valued could never purchase. While carrying the last box from the building that no longer belonged to him, Jayden noticed workers installing a new sign in the lobby: Horizon Neuroempath Division. His legacy was being erased while Tasha's flourished. That afternoon, in a warmly lit conference room 50 floors above Manhattan, Tasha finalized a $3.2 billion contract with Meridian Pharmaceuticals, surrounded by her brilliant children and future husband. The empire she had built from abandonment's ashes wasn't just financially superior to anything Jayden had achieved. It was emotionally richer, founded on genuine connections rather than status-seeking ambition. 2 weeks after the gala, Tasha invited the triplets for a rare midweek family dinner at home. As they gathered around the table in their penthouse, she recognized that the time had come for complete honesty. "I know you've seen the news coverage," she began, meeting each of their eyes. "I've always told you that your biological father chose not to be part of our lives, but I've spared you some of the harsher details." "You mean how he called us financial burdens before we were even born?" Zaire asked matter-of-factly. "We've known for years, Mom. We found the court records when we were 12. Tasha's eyes widened in surprise. We wanted to understand, Zara explained gently. We never mentioned it because we could tell the subject caused you pain. Why didn't you tell me you knew? Zion shrugged. It wasn't relevant to our lives. The facts were clear. He made a choice that statistically benefited us by removing a potentially negative influence. Typical Zion analysis, Zara said, rolling her eyes affectionately at her brother. What he means is that we've always known there was more to the story than you shared. We appreciated your protection, but we're old enough to handle the truth. And the truth is, Zaire added with unexpected wisdom, his terrible decision resulted in the development of technology that helps millions. Ironically, we should thank him for his absence. The following morning, Tasha received an alert on her phone, an email from Jaden addressed to all 3 triplets. Somehow, he had obtained their private addresses. I would like to meet you properly, his message read. I understand your reluctance, but I'd like to explain my side of the story. Everyone deserves a second chance. She forwarded it immediately to the triplets, adding only, "This is your decision. I'll support whatever you choose." Their response came within the hour, a jointly composed email that reflected their unified stance. Mr. Thompson, we acknowledge receipt of your communication. While we understand your desire for connection, we must decline. We have a father who chose to love us from day one. Our family unit is complete. We wish you well in your future endeavors. Respectfully, Zion, Zara, and Zaire Williams. Formal, polite, and utterly final. 1 week later, Tasha agreed to meet Jaden at a neutral cafe near Central Park. He arrived early, his appearance markedly different from the gala, humbled, aging visibly under stress, his designer clothes replaced by business casual that still cost more than most people's formal wear. "Thank you for coming," he said, rising as she approached his table. "I'm here to ask that you respect their decision," Tasha stated, remaining standing. "They don't want contact, Jaden." "They're my children too," he protested weakly. "No," she corrected gently. "Biologically, yes. Legally, no. And emotionally, definitely not. You made sure of that 15 years ago." His shoulders sagged with the weight of recognition. "I made the biggest mistake of my life that night. I lost everything that really mattered." Tasha studied him, finding no satisfaction in his evident suffering. "I'm not here for your redemption, Jaden. I'm here for their protection." As she turned to leave, he called after her. "Are you happy, Tasha? Truly happy?" She paused, considering the question. "Yes," she answered simply. "I built everything you said I never could, and I found joy in the journey." That evening, Tasha returned to her penthouse to find Marcus waiting with champagne and a nervous expression. He dropped to one knee as she entered, ring box extended. "I've asked before, but this time I'm hoping for a different answer," he said. "Will you marry me, Tasha?" She looked at the man who had stood beside her through the building of an empire, who had loved her children as his own, who had never once made her feel insufficient. "Yes," she answered, finally ready for this new chapter. "Yes, I will." 3 days later, the triplets received their university acceptance letters. Zion to MIT for biomedical engineering, Zara to Stanford for computational neuroscience, and Zaire to Princeton for behavioral economics. As the Williams family celebrated these achievements, Tasha slipped away briefly to visit a place she hadn't returned to in 15 years, the Upper East Side prenatal clinic where her journey as a single mother had begun. The building had been transformed into a community medical center, funded by her foundation, serving low-income women and children. Standing on the sidewalk where Jaden had once abandoned her, Tasha felt no lingering pain, only profound gratitude for the path that had led her here. The snow that had fallen that day had long since melted, just as her wounds had healed, leaving behind not scars but strength. Years later, when Tasha Williams Reynolds received the Nobel Prize in Technology for the empath algorithm that revolutionized human-machine communication, Journalists tried to include the dramatic story of her past in their coverage, but discovered that the woman who had once been defined by a cruel abandonment was now simply known for the empire she built and the lives she transformed, including, most importantly, her own. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.